Welcome, everyone. Welcome to a very special Civic Saturday. We are so glad that you're choosing to spend your 4th of July this year, stepping into this activity with us. And I'm telling you that by the end of this hour, you are going to be filled up with new ideas, new feelings, a new sense of how you're feeling on this 4th of July holiday. I'm Kayla DeMonte. I'm the Deputy Director at Citizen University, and welcome. By the very nature of the fact that you are here to participate in a gathering called Civic Saturday, this holiday is one that might bring up a variety of feelings. Maybe you're feeling a sense of pride and gratitude for all of the ways that people across the country are working to live up to and improve our democracy. Maybe you're feeling cynical or bitter, or frankly fearful, looking around and experiencing the ways that our country is struggling. We're with you. And maybe you are glad to have a day to spend some quality time with family or friends. And you know what? Hang on to that last one. You'll hear a bit more about how the people that we choose to spend this day with are more important than we may realize. The challenges that we Americans are facing can some days feel like they are all consuming, filling up our minds and our hearts and our souls. On a day set aside to reflect on and celebrate our nation, consider this Civic Saturday an offering and an invitation to fill up those minds and hearts and souls with some beautiful reflections that aren't about turning away, but are about connecting in new ways and leaning in. We think there is no better day to reflect on and celebrate what we all want to do to help our country move forward and heal. This is a time to gather with each other and to gather with intention. Let's start with a poem to help us open our hearts and minds. Hakeem Bellamy is the inaugural poet laureate of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he'll be sharing an original poem with us today.
Hello, Hakeem Bellamy with a poem to celebrate one of America's other Independence Days, Juneteenth, Jubilee, a postmortem. There are not enough days off to settle this tab. This score of sores and of sorts, no union, army, or otherwise, no way to get all that unpaid time on back. No vacation time buyback, for the simple fact that there was no such thing, then or now or never. Slavery did not have weekends. There were no happy hours, no holidays, including birthdays, no reason for any of us to count. Our longevity, never a concern. No break room, no marriages, no matter what. No Sunday, only a few hours to pantomime praise to a God that looks more like them than you, one who only ever intercedes on behalf of the employer, no representation, no mediation, just a mass grave full of grievances going unheard, no someday until today, the day the job is done because we say so. The self-same day that we are worth more than what that body do or what that body make. More than all the babies, all the building, all the buildings, every single bushel and bale, more than job numbers and GDP, more than an entire economy that has always had blood money on its hands, whether it was ours or oil, the blood was always black. Next year, when Hallmark comes out with its line of Juneteenth greeting cards, I hope for a few things. One, for a piece of the action, because nothing says reparations like stock options, if you're out there listening, Hallmark. Two, a market for goods and services where our worth is more than just our weight in libations, labor, and legal tender, where Black bodies are more than just a price tag at the end of a string, holding together a society that is at the end of its rope. Oh, and three, a card that reads, "Dear ancestor, with these days off, I hereby give you your life back."
Hakeem, thank you so much. That was, as always, beautiful and reflective. You'll be hearing from Hakeem again in a collaboration with Seattle musician Jose Juicy Gonzalez. They'll be sharing an extremely cool and moving original piece that they wrote especially for you today. Today, you might be tuning in by yourself. Maybe you're watching around a dinner table with friends or even at a block party with your neighbors. We're taking this DIY approach to our tradition here at Citizen University, Civic Saturdays. And yes, we know that it might not be Saturday when you're watching, but that's okay. We think of Civic Saturdays as a civic analog to a faith gathering. It's a place to connect around the values and practices of being an active citizen today in America, to reckon with and reflect on our nation's creed, and to build new traditions that are joyful and communal. And what better day to do that than Independence Day, a day when many of us are already thinking about our country, gathering with others, and participating in rituals. We'll be hearing more music and poetry, rooting ourselves in some historical texts that we call Civic Scripture, and hearing a civic sermon from Eric Liu, and of course, connecting with each other, which is what we're going to dive into next. So it's time for what we call the turn and talk. If you're with people you don't know, introduce yourself. And if you're by yourself, go ahead and pick up a pen and paper to jot down some thoughts on this prompt. Also, get ready to pause this video and take about 5 to 10 minutes to reflect on a question. Here's what we want you to think about today. Who are the people and institutions you depend on to get through a day? Who are the people and institutions that you depend on to get through a day? So hit pause on this video, take a few minutes, and then restart when you're ready. We'll be back here and we'll see you soon.
We collaborated on a song, an original composition for Civic Saturday. We hope you like it. And yeah, if you get a feel of it a little bit in, you can sing along. That would be really cool.
Before we teach the world to sing, we gotta teach the world to talk. Before you run for anything, you gotta crawl before you walk. Before we celebrate our rights, we gotta recognize our wrongs. Before every single night, there is a day that feels just as long. How to build a garden, one plant at a time. Now we can grow together. Put your hand in mine. We could feed a nation with all the love that we'll find. How to build a garden, one hand at a time. I believe we can put this back together. I believe it won't be this way forever, no. I believe in what's good and getting better. I believe that the only way to get there, believe in you.
Yeah, we believe in y'all.
Believe in you.
Yo, one time in your mind.
Now.
Whistle while we work, they trying to whip us of our worth. Poll the people while we wonder if elections really work. We 40-hour widgets in this system till it hurts, and then forget we're global citizens, the businesses to earn. Grab a shovel and a friend or two, we about to get these crops cracking like we planters. Peanuts and democracy is the harvest. Cultivate a conversation, dialogue during process. Many hands make less, labors will bring a neighbor to the garden. We a long way from eating, little less from picking cotton, but at least we outside ourselves and those echo chamber toxins. We could fuel a nation with the bounty that is us, melting pot or fondue. due to misfortune of potluck. We a long way from eating little, less from picking cotton, but at least we outside ourselves and those echo chamber toxins. We could fuel a nation with the bounty that is us, melting pot refined due to misfortune of potluck.
1, 2, 3, 4. How to build a garden, one plant at a time. We can grow together. Put your hand in mine. We could feed a nation with all of the love that we'll find. How to build a garden, one plant at a time. We're gonna build a garden, one hand at a time. One hand at a time. One hand at a time.
My name is Chris Hayashida Knight, and I'll be reading an excerpt from What to the Slave is the 4th of July, written and delivered by Frederick Douglass in 1852 in Rochester, New York. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too, great enough to give fame to a great age. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance, and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. But, interpreted as it ought to be interpreted, the Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Is it at the gateway? Or is it in the temple? It is neither. Well, I do not intend to argue this question on the present occasion. Let me ask, if it be not somewhat singular that if the Constitution were intended to be, by its framers and adopters, a slaveholding instrument, why neither slavery, slaveholding, nor slave can anywhere be found in it? On the other hand, it will be found to contain principles and purposes entirely hostile to the existence of slavery.
My name is Vicky Rubio, and I'll be reading an excerpt from the Declaration of the Rights of Women, written by Susan B. Anthony and her peers in 1876 for an Independence Day ceremony in Philadelphia. It was the boast of the founders of the Republic that the rights for which they contended were the rights of human nature, If these rights are ignored in the case of one half the people, the nation is surely preparing for its downfall. Governments try themselves. The recognition of a governing and a governed class is incompatible with the first principles of freedom. Woman has not been a heedless spectator of the events of this century, nor a dull listener to the grand arguments for the equal rights of humanity. From the earliest history of our country, woman has shown equal devotion with man to the cause of freedom and has stood firmly by his side in its defense. Together, they have made this country what it is. Woman's wealth, thought, and labor have cemented the stones of every monument man has raised to liberty. And now, at the close of 100 years, as the hour hand of the great clock that marks the centuries points to 1876, we declare our faith in the principles of self-government, our full equality with man in natural rights. The woman was made first for her own happiness, with the absolute right to herself, to all the opportunities and advantages life affords for her complete development. And we deny that dogma of the centuries incorporated in the codes of all nations that woman was made for man, her best interests in all cases to be sacrificed to his will. We ask of our rulers at this hour no special favors, no special privileges, no special legislation. We ask justice. We ask equality. We ask that all the civil and political rights that belong to citizens of the United States be guaranteed to us and our daughters forever.
Wow, I am so moved by the song, the poetry, the civic scripture we've heard today, and just so moved literally, like I'm moving during the song, but just remembering that all of this work right now, all of the ways in which we're gathering together, wherever you may be right now, is part of movement. It's part of change. It's part of things not being in stasis. And my heart is moved, and so grateful to all of you for joining this Civic Saturday, however you may be experiencing it, wherever you may be. You may be watching me by yourself, and if so, you welcome, and you are not alone. You may be watching this with a group of others, strangers, friends, family, and welcome to all of you. I'm Eric Liu. I'm the co-founder of Citizen University, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being part of this Civic Saturday. My mind has been not only on Independence Day, but on big commemorations. I've been thinking a lot lately about the bicentennial back in 1976, when I was 7 years old, going on 8. And I was reflecting back on that time in the country's history when, the bicentennial was a big deal for those of you who were around for that. All kinds of institutions and people got engaged in schools and classrooms and everything. And yet, as a kid at that time, and I played Thomas Jefferson in my school play for the bicentennial. At the time, I had just no idea how much upheaval the world was in. I had no idea how much pain and bloodshed and heartbreak the United States had gone through in the prior decade and a half. I had no idea of the measure of the Vietnam War, the tens of thousands who died. I had no idea of the assassinations that had bloodied the body politic in the prior years, of Watergate, of the fracturing of trust in political leaders and institutions and government itself. I had no idea. I was just blissfully going along as a young person. And I've been thinking about that because you think ahead now to a few years from now in 2026, when I hope I'll be 57 going on 58, I realize when we get to the country's 250th birthday, well, my eyes will be far more wide open this time. But more importantly, so will the eyes of today's young people. You can't be young today. And those of you who are in the room right now, who are in your teens and 20s, you can't be young today and not realize how fractured everything has been almost your entire lives. It's hard. It's hard for everybody, but it's especially hard for someone who's been born only into a time of chaos and war and privation and pandemic, from 9/11 to the financial collapse to the breakdown of our institutions in the face of threats to the rule of law and free and fair elections, to a pandemic that has broken trust in all our institutions and in each other. It's hard right now to believe that something different is possible. And yet, what is so motivating to me and why I come today with this spirit of possibility is I spend a lot of my days talking to young people right now who have every reason to think, what's the point? I was born into a house on fire. I don't know what it's like for things to be stable and peaceful and prosperous and full of dignity and prosperity. And yet it's precisely these young people who are putting in more energy pound for pound than any other generation to bring that world into being, to plant that garden and make it sprout, to do a thing that young people are always told they can't do, and that is to force the spring. Young people are forcing the spring. They're doing so, though, right now in ways that may be detached from the language that we use around the 4th of July, the language of patriotism, the language of love of country. And there's a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, who are skeptical, shall we say, about the language of patriotism. People on the left who see only the ways in which our country has failed, continues to fail, and seems on an arc to keep on failing, to live up to its promises. People on the right who don't think about these questions too much and feel offended when others point out the ugly and the bad in our history and not just the good. And then, of course, the most cynical and dangerous people on the far right who are co-opting the language of patriotism to create things like the Patriot Front, that cabal of white nationalist militia people who want to sow chaos and bloodshed in our communities. People like the insurrectionists of January 6th, who, alongside their Confederate flags, waved American flags and pretended to patriotism. There's a lot of people with a lot of reason to be skeptical about this, and young people especially. You know that talk of restoring America's greatness, rebuilding and reclaiming America's democracy is hollow talk, as hollow as the talk that Frederick Douglass in the piece of Civic Scripture we heard as part of this gathering, as hollow as the talk he said of Independence Day was to the ears of a slave. Young people know that that is hollow talk, that you can't restore or reclaim a thing that you've never known. That love of country requires a reason to love. And there's a lot of folks right now who don't feel like they have a reason to love, and not just young people and people on the left, people on the right who've been abandoned by our institutions, who are dying deaths of despair, who feel like the society has ground them down and left them behind. But I insist that we hold on to and breathe life into this language of love of country. I insist that you read the Declaration of Independence with new eyes, new ears, new heart. I know as well as anybody, the 56 signers of the Declaration were propertied, prosperous, privileged white men, 41 of whom were enslavers. I know that fact, and you can win a debate point by pointing out that fact, but what you cannot do is obliterate the reality that for all of that hypocrisy, the thing that they bequeathed us, the language, the ideas, the claims, and the promises, are still things that we are putting to use, are still things that we are making something out of, are still the materials of the garden of democracy that we must now fashion. And I don't believe anybody's imagination is so limited that you can't see the power of that potential inheritance. Those signers of the Declaration, for all their flaws and all of their sins, individually and institutionally, they were, as Frederick Douglass said, great men in this sense. They were mature and they were courageous when they broke the bond with Great Britain. And why could they summon that maturity and that courage? Because they had already been, for a generation, building the alternative. They had already been sowing, seeding, weeding, feeding, planting the garden of a self-governing democracy. Yes, only for a few, only for white propertied men who could vote in that polity, but they were building the precedent, the prototype that we get to be version 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of. And so people who today, in a cheap and easy way, throw around the language of rebellion against tyranny, don't tread on me, without any sense of discerning or discriminating between what is an actual threat to our core liberties and what is simply the inconvenience of being in a society bigger than just you. People who today talk like that and just want to burn things down, sow chaos, and not sow new gardens, they do so without regard for what comes next. And what comes next is, I think, what's got to be on all our minds. Living through this time of pandemic and war and mass shootings and every other reason for us to just curl up and turn off and hide, is a time for us to actually remember not how the Declaration of Independence begins, with its famous language about these truths being self-evident and so on and so forth, but actually how the Declaration ends and how it points to what comes next. Because how the Declaration ends is with a sentence that not enough of us have committed to memory. And that sentence is this: we mutually pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. Sit with that for a minute and think about what it would be like to put your lives, your fortunes, your sacred honor on the line for a thing that you believed in. And for those who signed that declaration, the thing they believed in was not simply no more British, no more Stamp Act. The thing that they believed in was taking on the burdens of self-rule, taking on the burdens of establishing justice for themselves on their own terms and not subject to the whims of a tyrant or a king. And what I want to focus on here is the three words of that sentence that are the most important. We mutually pledge. We mutually pledge. I want to unpack each of these as a way to see where we are right now and what comes next for us as a society. We. Who is this we? Yes, the we in 1776 was those 56 powdered wig white dudes. But we now, all of us, claim it in a different way. And we now are doing one of human history's most audacious things. We are trying to prove that it is possible to create a mass, multiracial, multi-faith democratic republic that lasts more than one or two rounds. Hasn't been done on planet Earth yet. Hasn't been done in the United States yet. And yet we are gathered here today because enough of us still believe that it is possible. And it is possible only if we commit to making a bigger we. A we that is as narrowly drawn as the we of 1776 or 1876 or even 1976 is not enough, is not going to get us there. A we that includes all of us and that is committed to pluralism and hybridity is a we that can answer the question, what does we the people mean to the descendants of the slave? What does the we the people mean to the descendants of the women who were denied the franchise? What we the people can mean to them, what we mutually pledge can mean to them, to us now, is that we're in. We're in. We are here. And that's not a cause for just backpatting and celebration. That is a cause for serious responsibility taking. We have entered the room, all of us. But what that means when I say pluralism, that means we have to be committed to the idea that the room isn't going to look like us. The room isn't going to talk like us, pray like us, vote like us, think like us. The room is going to be as mixed as humanity is mixed, because the United States is as mixed as humanity is mixed. The question that is embedded in the word we is, how shall we live together? Is it possible to live together with this diverse and far-flung a group of humans without some dominating others, without always there being a group of second class and oppressed? We are finding out. We are answering that question. We are authoring the answer to that question by remembering that the more people we include in the we, the more likely we make it that we can answer that question in the affirmative, that it is possible. And that brings me to the second word here that we're talking about. And that word is mutually. Mutually. Why did Why did the signers of the Declaration use that word? They could have just said, we pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. But they weren't just as a group and as a body pledging to us, readers of the document. They were pledging to one another, all 56 cords of connection and commitment along every point of that circle, each to all the others. They had made that bond with one another, and that's what prepared them to make the leap together. And when you think about the commitment that is embedded in the idea of mutually pledging, what you realize is that is about surrendering the illusion of autonomy, surrendering the illusion that I'm just a self-made man, self-made woman, operating independently on my own, making it in the world. And what it means, in short, is surrendering the illusion of the American dream, the illusion that American culture is only about the lone cowboy riding off into the sunset, only about the rugged individualist figuring things out for herself. There is no such thing as a self-made man or woman. There is no such thing as that kind of pure, isolated independence. What there is continually mutual dependence, and mutual not only as among we who are gathered here today, but mutually across generations, between the young and the old of now, but also between those who preceded us and are long gone and those who have yet to come. We are in a mutual compact. And you think about the things that we mark in this civic season right now, Juneteenth, Independence Day. What preceded and followed Juneteenth was mutual aid. Emancipation of the slaves, announced finally in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, was preceded not only by the Emancipation Proclamation, it was preceded by centuries of mutuality among the enslaved, ways in which these families fractured and broken, their bloodlines, their heart lines and hearth lines torn asunder by the enslavers and by the economy that empowered the enslavers, that they managed still to sustain in a spirit of mutuality, a circulation of story, a circulation of identity, a circulation of tradition and knowledge and social capital. What followed Juneteenth was the Freedmen's Bureau, the paths of Reconstruction that made the slave into a citizen. Mutual aid. Not you're on your own, not, hey, you're free, best of luck to you, but rather they to one another, the once enslaved, and the society to them as a matter of obligation, mutually supporting in a path to citizenship. What preceded and followed Seneca Falls, what preceded and followed the 19th Amendment was mutual aid. Every movement of liberation in this country's life is a movement of reciprocal power building, of people relying on one another. And seen this way, the Declaration of Independence is more like a memorandum of mutual aid, of people making commitments to one another, following through on those commitments, and knowing that we got each other. And that brings me to the final dimension of this part of the Declaration, and that is the word pledge. What does it mean to pledge? We think about the Declaration as this, well, bill of complaints. The king did this, the king did that, the British did this, the British did that, we're so mad, we're out of here. But again, it's important to focus most on how that document ends. And how it ends is with a commitment to responsibility taking. When you pledge mutually to one another, your lives, your fortunes, your sacred honor, when you pledge to make a new nation, you're recognizing that freedom is not simply the removal of encumbrance. Liberty is not just license, the right to do whatever the hell you want. Freedom is responsibility. Liberty is the assumption of duty to more than just yourself and more than just your kind. It is the ability also to discern between degrees and kinds of threats to liberty. What that pledge idea underscores is that the Declaration was born not in a vacuum, but out of a culture of commitment, out of a culture of civic faith, of a belief that the committing is what makes it possible. And that's the note that I want to end on today. The Declaration, yes, seems like a dusty document. Few of us have read the whole thing, certainly recently. So let's think about this in human terms. When I think about all the reasons why people have to give up hope, give up belief that America is possible, all the reasons why people are cynical and rolling their eyes at the idea that liberty and justice for all might be achieved, that equal protection of the laws might be enacted, I think about a guy named James Stockdale. James Stockdale, most living Americans haven't heard of, but this is fairly recent memory. James Stockdale was a Navy admiral who was a POW during the Vietnam War. He was a pilot who was shot down, and he spent 8 years in the Hanoi Hilton. And as a senior officer there, he led a group of other POWs through that long, dark journey of confinement, isolation, brutality, fear of death. And Stockdale, when he finally was released and came back out into the world, he explained how it was that he and the others there who survived made it through. First of all, he pointed out who didn't make it. Who didn't make it, he said, were the optimists. The people who just blithely, without really thinking about it, said, oh, we'll be out by Christmas. And Christmas came. Oh, we'll be out by Easter. And Easter came. Oh, we'll be out by July 4th. And July 4th came. And with each blithe, optimistic assumption that was disappointed, they lost heart, they lost hope, and they lost life. What Stockdale said held him and held the others who made it through was what since has been called the Stockdale paradox, which is to simultaneously hold two things in our heads and our hearts at the same time. And this is what the framers of the Declaration did, and this is what we, in these times right now, times that, as Thomas Paine said, try men's souls, these hard, painful, brutal times that we are living in right now. And the two things that Stockdale held in this paradox were, number one, you got to face the brutal facts. You got to face the fact that, in his case, you might not get out, that your road might end here, that this may be it. You got to face the brutal facts of how you got here and all the wrong and all the error and all the sin and all the pain that brought you to this situation. And simultaneously, you must maintain absolute belief that you will get through this, that you will get out, that you will make it through. And that part, holding those two, facing the brutal facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly of our current situation and how we got here, and yet also maintaining absolute faith that we will get through this, well, that's a message for us sent from the 70s to today, sent from the 1770s today. That is a message for us. And what's unspoken in that message is that that faith, the latter part of the Stockdale paradox, the faith is fortified by the doing. It's easy to talk about this stuff. It's easy to talk about hard times and trying men's souls, but it's only trying to face these things, face those facts, and still actually believe that this is possible. It's only in doing that that we can actually make it through. And so those who only want to celebrate or deprecate what we've inherited as Americans, that's not enough on this Independence Day or any day. It's not enough only to celebrate the good or deprecate the bad. What we should celebrate is that we get the right, we have the opportunity to do something with this inheritance, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The Declaration of Independence seems like it's a bill of complaints, but what it is a promise, a memorandum of mutual aid. It is a challenge to all of us and an invitation. Do you believe, do we believe enough right now to commit? And you know what? It's kind of a trick question, because committing is what will make you believe. Gardening is what makes you realize gardens are possible. Getting your hands in there, pulling up the weeds, planting new seeds, in spite of everything, is what makes you remember that something larger is possible right now. That is our task this day and every day as Americans. And I leave you with this question. Mutually, what shall we pledge to do so our country can live up to its promise? Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining together today. We hope that what you just experienced made you feel grounded and offered some new things to think about and talk about with friends and family. So what happens next? We want to hear how this went and what it sparked for you. Here are 2 ways to do so. The first is a Zoom call to connect with others. We'll be hosting some Civic Circle follow-ups to help you connect with other people across the country who also just participated in their own personal Civic Saturdays. It will be a chance to make connections and share reflections on what you just experienced. And plus there will be a Q&A with Eric on the words that he shared in his sermon. This Civic Circle is going to take place on the evening of July 6th. You can find the Zoom RSVP link below in the description and on our website. So make sure to sign up and we'll get you some more information. The second way, if you're more of a visual person, is that we've created a collaborative mural where you can upload your photos, reflections, and lingering questions and see what others are offering as well. You can add yours today and make sure to check back and see what gets added to it as we go. Link for that is also below and on our website. And if you enjoyed today bringing others together for this gathering, we would love to invite you to participate in our Civic Saturday Fellowship Program. It's a program here at Citizen University that equips motivated Americans just like you to bring your community together to hold regular Civic Saturday gatherings. Applications for our next cohorts are going to open on July 8th, so be on the lookout for that and consider applying. And truly, thank you again for being here, committing to powerful, responsible citizenship today and every day. Don't forget to join us for reflections and continue the conversation on July 6th, and we'll see you soon.